Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Cavalry Charge Precon from March of the Machine and its face commander, Sidar Jabari of Zhalfir, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. But before we continue, just a quick reminder that, at the time of uploading this, the channel's 10K subscriber giveaway is still going and has been extended to April 29th, in which one lucky winner will have the opportunity to win a $100 Urtet Remnant of Memnarch deck built by yours truly, as well as a plethora of accessories and upgrades for it. So if you're interested in signing up for your chance to win, be sure to check out the link above or in the description for the full build and how to enter. Additionally, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see which Precon upgrade we'll be covering next. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Sidar Jabari of Zhalfir is a 4/3 human knight with flying and first strike that costs 1 an Esper and has the following abilities. Eminence, whenever we attack with one or more knights, so long as Sidar Jabari is in the command zone or in play, we draw a card then discard a card, and whenever Sidar Jabari deals combat damage to a player, we return target knight creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. Breaking down his core stats, Sidar Jabari is sporting a mid-range CMC, a more or less typical stat block for his cost alongside solid keywords that make him very difficult to block effectively, and a powerful pair of abilities focused around knights that initially allow us to use them as repeatable card selection and graveyard setup until our commander comes into play to reanimate any knights we've lost or pitched as he swings in. Taking a closer look at Sidar Jabari's first ability, it effectively gives us a free loot per turn so long as at least one knight under our control swings in so long as our commander's in play or, more importantly, in the command zone, making Sidar Jabari one of the very few commanders that can affect the game before we even cast him. And while yes, this is only a once per turn or draw one discard one, the fact that we're getting it for free right at the beginning of the game at no mana cost goes a long way to help smooth out our draws in the early game and set up our graveyard for the later game. And speaking of which, our commander's second ability takes full advantage of that aforementioned graveyard setup by being a repeatable source of tribal reanimation, allowing us to cheat into play any knights we've discarded through his eminence ability and or other means, or otherwise return any knights that have been destroyed by our opponents to be used again. That said, we do still need to deal combat damage with him to proc this ability, but seeing as our commander has built-in evasion, it should be reasonably easy to find a player at the table without a flyer to swing into, and if we're able to find a way to grant our commander double strike, we can trigger this reanimation multiple times per turn for added value. And as a quick side note, it should be noted that both of Sidar's abilities are mandatory, which is not typically a problem, but should be kept in mind in case we're running low on cards or don't want to reanimate a particular target right away. So, as we can see based on his abilities, Sidar Jabari of Zhalfir is most certainly a knight tribal commander, bestowing them with free card selection, graveyard setup, and tribal reanimation, and the base build does a very good job at reflecting that, giving us a superb selection of powerful new and old knights with potent tribal synergies to power themselves up even further, alongside a wide selection of tribal payoffs to generate us even more damage output and value. So, in order to further improve upon it, I decided to lean into the core build's Anthems and Lords theme, adding in even more means to power up our knights that either our commander could cheat into play for us or reanimate if our opponents remove them, or would do so from the relative safety of the back row where our opponents would hopefully be unable to reach them. That, along with making some quality of life changes by adjusting the build's core stats to either include more efficient or more on-theme sources of ramp, draw, removal, and wipes, will leave us with a powerful knight tribal build that is able to amass huge board states under a multitude of Lords and Anthems that will be more than capable of overrunning any opposition they encounter. So let us planeswalk to the once lost plane of Zhalfir to meet the last and best hope against Elesh Norn's Phyrexian incursion. It is here we'll find Sidar Jabari, one of the most powerful and decorated members of the Zhalfiran royal army, readying his elite lance of Zhalfiran knights to face off against the worst horrors the Spanog Yawgmoth have to offer as they prepare to take the fight to New Phyrexia. For nearly a decade, they were trapped in the Blind Eternities, while over 3 centuries passed on Dominaria, spending every single day of their imprisonment training to fight the Phyrexians of old. But now they're free once more, and all too eager to show these new Phyrexian horrors the legendary might of Zhalfir. Honed over their military empire's 5 millennia of existence, and now aimed squarely at Elish Norn's throat to end her calamitous ambitions once and for all. So, now that we have a better understanding of the commander and playstyle, let's take a look at the cards we'll be keeping from the base build. Starting off with our retained creature entries, we'll be aiming to keep the most powerful and synergistic knights included in the base build as a solid foundation for us to build upon. As such, we'll be hanging on to the Knight Lords, Knight Exemplar and Valiant Knight, both of whom provide a solid AoE stat bump to our tribe and either make our knights much harder for our opponents to remove via granting them indestructible, or allowing them to hit harder and survive combat via double strike, with the latter also allowing us to proc our commanders on damage reanimation twice per turn. The Pseudo-Lords, Exsanguinator Cavalry and Vodalian Wave Knight, which instead load up our knights with +1/+1 counters as they deal damage or we draw cards, both things that we'll be doing quite often in this deck, in addition to the former also supplementing our commander's loot effect with its blood token production, and the mass evasion granting Herald of Hoofbeats, who more or less makes our entire board unblockable thanks to its AoE horsemanship granting, allowing our knights to crack in for maximum damage. We'll then also be holding on to the legends Hakon Stromgald Scourge and Ariel Knight of Windgrace, who support our knights even further by either allowing us to cast them from our graveyard for increased resilience, or by turning them into repeatable spot removal to have them deal with our opponent's threats. And then Locthwain Lancer will be carrying over as our final piece of AoE Knight support, providing all our tribe members with on-death card draw and AoE burn, which at best will deter our opponents from wiping our board, and at worst will at least allow the tribe members we lose to replace themselves. From there, we'll then be pivoting to our retained token creating knights, with Elenda and Azor of course staying in as an excellent source of knight tokens via our deck's multitude of card draw sources, including their own, while also being a superb reanimation target to cheat into play. Xeric Strobe Knight and Silverwing Squadron both holding on to their spots as repeatable sources of tribal tokens with built-in evasion to more easily get in for damage, and Worthy Knight, Hero of Bladehold, and Adeline Resplendent Cathar all keeping their spots as easy to trigger sources of non-tribal tokens that we can use to screen attacks with as our main force of knights charge into our opponents, with Hero of Bladehold also powering up our knights and non-knights as it swings in thanks to Battle Cry. Then quickly running down our remaining kept creature entries, Murderous Rider, Either Sworn Adjudicator, and Vona Butcher of Magan will all be keeping their spots as decent and mostly reusable removal that fit into our knight-focused game plan. Midnight Reaper and Knights of the Black Rose will be staying in as well as more on-theme passive sources of card advantage to keep our hands nicely topped off, as will Acclaimed Contender, who provides us with decent card selection as it ETBs on an on-curve tribal body. Knight of the White Orchid retains its spot as a cheap source of land-based ramp, which is a rarity in our colors, whose first strike also allows it to swing in safely when powered up. Smitten Swordmaster and Wintermoor Commander carry over as additional pieces of knight support via their AoE drain and tribal toughness power-up / indestructibility granting respectively. And finally, Corpse Knight makes it in as our last kept creature entry thanks to its low cost and synergy with our commander's reanimation. Then proceeding to our instant holdovers, we'll exclusively be hanging on to the core build's removal options in this category, with Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, and Return to Dust all retaining their positions in the deck as solid exile-based removal options that deal with many common threats we may encounter. In contrast, our sorcery carryovers will only consist of sources of card advantage, with Painful Truths and Read the Bones staying in as decent generic draw that doesn't rely on our knights to function, which is always nice to have access to both in the early game or if our board state has been demolished by our opponents. Then moving on to our kept enchantments, the tribal support pieces Chivalric Alliance and Knight's Charge are the only two that made the cut. The former by providing easy to enable card advantage in addition to additional graveyard setup and tribal token creation, and the latter by tacking on a free drain to our knights as they attack, as well as serving as an emergency mass tribal reanimate just in case we need it, making them both well worth hanging on to further support our knight-focused game plan. The tribal support then continues as we move on to our retained artifact entries, with Conjurer's Mantle, Herald's Horn, and Vanquisher's Banner all keeping their spots as excellent sources of tribal card advantage that also provide additional utility by either powering up our tribe members or reducing their costs, respectively. We then have some mana rocks closing out our artifact holdover category, with Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Orzhov Signet, and Felwar Stone all staying in as powerful sources of ramp that help us speed up and or fix our mana base to get our commander and higher CMC spells out that much faster. And finally, reaching our land base carryovers, we'll start off with our retained mana lands, in which we'll be hanging on to Command Tower, Arcane Sanctum, and Path of Ancestry thanks to them tapping for all our colors, with the last also providing some decent tribal-themed card selection as well. Exotic Orchard, which can generally tap for a few colors off our opponent's lands, Prairie Stream and Sunken Hollow, which are both solid dual lands we can generally get into play untapped with little effort, Choked Estuary, Port Town, and Shine Shadow Snarl, which are even more dual lands we can get into play untapped thanks to our relatively large volume of basic lands, Temple of Deceit, Temple of Enlightenment, and Temple of Silence, which again tap for two of our colors for even more fixing and make up for coming into play tapped with their ETB card selection, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, whose land fetching helps us further improve our mana base's consistency, and Myriad Landscape, which provides the build with some much needed land-based ramp in our colors to further speed up our mana base. Then as our lone utility land holdover, we have Bajuka Bog, which serves as a silver bullet against any graveyard-focused decks we may encounter, all from the comfort and convenience of our land slot. And finally, we'll be keeping 7 plains, 6 islands, and 5 swamps from the base build as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 73 cards including basic lands we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 27 cards to replace. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. Beginning with our new creature additions, we'll start off by replacing some of the less synergistic legendary knights in the build with a new wave of lords to power up our tribe members even further. For example, Arvad the Cursed, whose legendary focused anthem doesn't get enough mileage in this build, will be replaced with Marshal of Zhalfir, who's a much cheaper tribal lord for our knights that can also tap down our opponent's creatures as a bonus to enable and to prevent attacks. Sir Eleanor the Discerning's cantrip and variable power based on hand size will be exchanged out for Benelish Marshal, whose generic anthem can power up our non-knight tokens as well, and whose restrictive mana cost can be circumvented by pitching it and reanimating it with our commander if we don't have access to the colors. And lastly, Josuves Lich Knight and Sir Conrad the Grim will be cut as well, as they seem good on paper, but the former most of the time will just be a vanilla knight unless we're able to cast him for 10, which is a bit too slow for our purposes, while the latter's okay but would be a much better fit in a dedicated aristocrats build to make the most use out of his graveyard-focused life loss. So we'll be replacing them with Glenalendra Liege and Thistledown Liege, who on their own provide a +2/+2 stat bump to our commander and generally at least a +1/+1 bump to a good chunk of our board to empower them even further, with the former's built-in evasion being solid to allow it to get in for extra damage, and the latter's flash making it useful to enable surprise alpha strikes. And then we'll continue on this game plan by swapping out some non-legendaries for even more anthems, with the overcosted Knight of the Last Breath being replaced with Nadar Selfless Paladin, who hits the board sooner, nets us value from the dungeon as he ETBs and swings, and even eventually becomes a generic lord to further empower our board, and Order of Midnight and its admittedly decent graveyard recursion losing its spot to Sky Hunter Strike Force, who's also evasive and can pump our board by up to a massive +3/+3 thanks to granting all our creatures melee so long as our commander's in play. Then, with all our new lords and lord-like creatures covered, we'll move on to some additional ways to get double strike on our commander to get double the use out of his reanimation, in which we'll be replacing the mediocre cantrip Foulmire Knight and the 2 situational draw source Liliana Standard Bearer with Silverblade Paladin and Quende Pride of Femerith, both of whom provide manaless ways to get double strike on our commander or, on occasion, on some of our other knights to improve their damage output instead. And as we start closing in on the end of our creature upgrades, we'll be refining the deck's removal package by swapping out Pull from Tomorrow and Distant Melody, which are very solid draw options but are overshadowed by others already included in the build or that we'll be adding in ourselves, and putting in Cavalier of Dawn and Cavalier of Night in their place. which serve as tribal spot removal options that we can easily cheat into play and reuse thanks to our commander's reanimation, on top of having powerful stat blocks, keywords, and even on-death triggers for us to take advantage of as they enter and leave play. And lastly, reaching the tail end of our creature upgrades, we'll be scrapping Sigiled Sword of Valorant's tribal token creation for Triumphant Adventurer, whose low cost and combination of on-attack, first strike, death touch, and dungeon venturing make it a very solid way to generate value and proc our commander's loot effect, and replacing the decent protection spell Unbreakable Formation with the more on-theme protection spell Guardian of Faith, who protects our board against more types of removal and wipes, while also proccing and benefiting from all our tribal payoffs as well. It's then on to our instant upgrades, in which the only change we'll be making will be refining our removal package by exchanging Despark's slightly limited removal for Generous Gift, which may not exile but is actually able to hit low CMC targets and lands for added flexibility and coverage. Then continuing on the trend of core stat improvement, the only changes we'll be making to our sorcery upgrades will be powering up our board wipes by axing Time Wipe and Fell the Mighty, and slotting in Dam and Austere Command in their place. The former's flexibility as both a single target removal option or a wipe, allowing us to take advantage of it even if we don't need to wipe the board, and the latter's modular nature ensuring we'll generally always have the type of wipe we need depending on the situation to retake control of the board without suffering too many losses. Our enchantment upgrades will then continue to refine our core stats by exchanging out Path of Enigma's serviceable draw for Kindred Discovery, which provides us with an insane amount of repeatable card advantage as our knights ETB and attack, undoubtedly making it the best source of card advantage in our build and well worth its high cost, both in the CMC and a literal sense. Then proceeding to our artifact upgrades, we'll start off by overhauling our ramp package completely to make it as efficient and as reliable as possible, with the colorless Mana Rocks Fractured Power Stone and Mind Stone being scrapped in favor of Dimir Signet and Azorius Signet, whose colored mana production is much more significant in this 3-color build over their predecessors, the overcosted Rocks Commander Sphere and Ichor Elixir being shelved to make room for Talisman of Hierarchy and Talisman of Dominance, which are cheaper and still provide us access to colored mana, which is critical in the early game to get our initial Knights and Commander on board quickly and reliably, the somewhat random inclusion Maul of the Skyclaves being traded out for Wayfarer's Bauble, which provides much sought after cheap and efficient land-based ramp in our colors, and the solid but slightly out of place wipe Promise of Loyalty being exchanged out for Chromatic Lantern, which instantly fixes our mana base as soon as it comes down to allow us to play even our hardest to cast multi-pip spells with ease. And then as our final pair of artifact upgrades, we'll be replacing some of the base build's excess lands in favor of additional anthems, such as cutting the arguably bad land Temple of the False God to make room for Icon of Ancestry, which gives us access to yet another tribal anthem effect that we can also use to generate card advantage in our knight-focused build, and replacing the reliable but slow land Thriving Heath with a legendary artifact, the Circle of Loyalty, which we can generally cast for 2 thanks to our knights reducing its cost, and provides us with a generic anthem, free knight tokens as we cast our handful of legendary creatures, and the means to create additional tribal tokens by pumping mana into it to generate even more board presence for us. And then getting in on the fresh new battle category, we'll be cutting up planes to make room for Invasion of New Capenna, whose front face is a decent exile-based removal effect that also helps us get a knight with an ETB effect into the bin to be reanimated and used again by our commander, and whose back face, Holy Frazzle Cannon, is not only in contention for the best card name ever, but also permanently grows our knights and humans with +1/+1 counters if equipped to our commander as he swings in before damage is even dealt to improve our damage output even further, and conveniently, thanks to its 4 defense counters, being easily brought online with a single swing from our commander. And at last, reaching our land upgrades, we'll be swapping out our remaining slow Thrive lands, Thriving Isle and Thriving Moor, for the faster and more tribal-focused Secluded Courtyard and Unclaimed Territory, which can tap for any of our colors as we cast our knights to provide one last boost to our mana base's consistency. So, now that we've covered all 27 cards we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 37 creatures including the commander, 4 instants, 4 sorceries, 3 enchantments, 13 artifacts, no planeswalkers, 1 battle, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 37 knights, 6 sources of knight tokens, 24 cards that care about knights, 17 anthems and lords that provide stat boosts or keywords to our creatures, 3 sources that grant double strike, 3 sources of graveyard setup, and 4 sources of reanimation, leaving us with a very solid foundation of knights and knight support to enable Sidar Jabari, a large number of ways to empower them even further on the battlefield, and a handful of support pieces to empower our commander even further by getting the most out of his graveyard setup and reanimation. For general deck stats, we have 13 ramp sources, 12 card draw sources, 12 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes, giving us a pretty by-the-numbers ratio of core stats with no real outliers. Looking at our mana curve, we have 4 1-drops, 18 2-drops, 20 3-drops, 10 4-drops, 8 5-drops, and 4 6-drops, providing us with a mid-weight curve that aims to ramp into cheap knights in our commander to get our loot and reanimation game plan online as quickly as possible, then empowering our knights through the use of anthems and lords and generating value off of them through our support pieces until our cavalry overruns our opponents through their superior strength and resources. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.24 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, we can consider trading Invasion of New Capenna for Etchings of the Chosen if we want to cut our removal to gain access to a tribal anthem that comes online without jumping through any hoops that we can also use to protect our board. Guardian of Faith can be exchanged out for Reflections of Letjara if we care more about expanding and empowering our board via token copies of our Knights and Lords over protecting it from wipes and removal. And Chromatic Lantern can be swapped out for Gideon Ally of Zendikar if we're willing to give up the ramp and fixing it provides for the increased board presence via token creation and emblem-based anthem he provides. Then for further upgrades, Worthy Knight can be benched in favor of Battle Angels of Tyr to provide us with additional draw, ramp, and life gain on top of a tribal evasive body that can hit all our opponents simultaneously. Quende Pride of Femrith can be cut to make room for Kinsbale Cavalier, who is a literal upgrade in this case as, for the same mana cost, it provides double strike to all our knights to increase their damage output and combat survivability significantly. And the Artifact Anthems, Icon of Ancestry, and the Circle of Loyalty can be scrapped for the better Artifact Anthems, Door of Destinies, and Coat of Arms to give our knights even more of a stat boost to crash into our opponents with. And finally, we can swap out Dam and Austere Command for the even better wipes Kindred Dominance and Cyclonic Rift, both of which are one-sided wipes for us that will easily allow us to retake control of the board or set up alpha strikes, clearing our opponent's fields of threats as efficiently as they'll clear out our wallets if we want to run them. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Firstly, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who's been participating in the 10k subscriber giveaway. As of the time of uploading this, we've managed to crack the 10.8k subscriber milestone and are well underway to 10.9k. So sincerely, thank you all for helping the channel continue to grow. And if you haven't signed up for the giveaway already, be sure to do so either via the card on this video or in the link in the description for a chance to win a $100 Urtet Remnant of Memnarch deck built by me, along with various unlocked accessories and upgrades for it before the deadline on April 29th. Now, with the Cavalry Charge Precon covered, the next Precon upgrade guide we'll be tackling will be for Growing Threat and its face commander, Brimaz Blight of Areskos, so look forward to a Phyrexian themed glow up for this build coming soon. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.